Imagine for a moment you're at home and a wildfire is coming straight for everything you've built, your cabin, your memories, your way of life. That's where my wife and I are at right now. We should be on our trap line, but fire's tearing through that country, and the fire crews, they aren't letting anyone in. We don't know if our cabin is still standing. All we can do is wait and wonder. When it comes to wondering, did you know that there was a time when fire wasn't as much feared as it was respected and used both carefully and strategically by First Nations people? Problem is, because their practices were banned in the early 1900s, we are in a danger of losing the knowledge such people possessed. After the passage of so much time, the way our environment used to be during pre-settler times has largely been erased. Little evidence left behind. But there's a little known video I've recently discovered that through interviews with the last people living who knew the old ways, preserves their traditions and explains what they used to do and why. I believe this is a very important part of history, one that we should not allow to be lost. What I'm referring to is a film called The Fires of Spring, shot nearly 40 years ago by Dr. Henry T. Lewis, a professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta. It captures the stories and voices of Indigenous elders in northern Alberta, people who still remembered and practiced traditional fire use before the government forced them to stop. These aren't just old stories. These are the stories of my wife's people. She's now 74 years old and she grew up on one of the reserves this film was made on and still speaks the language. She recognizes many of the voices and faces in this film. Some of them are relatives, all of them now passed on. Proper credit for preserving this film should go to Rick Arthur of Drip Torch Consulting Incorporated. Mr. Arthur managed to find the original reels, digitize them, and even track down the edited version that Dr. Lewis was working on when he passed away. Rick then posted it to YouTube 6 years ago on a tiny one video channel with just 22 subscribers. Ourselves, having over 23,000 subscribers on our channel, we really hope to increase this film's reach. Now, just a note before we begin. I've replaced some of the background music in the film with my own to reduce the risk of copyright strikes. But the voices and messages remain untouched and unchanged. So let's begin, and if you're curious to learn more, stick around to the very end of this video, where I'll answer some of the most commonly asked questions about Indigenous fire management practices. Questions like, did Indigenous people really use fire deliberately, or was it just accidental? How did they know when and where to burn? Were these burns safe, and did they ever go out of control? Why did the government stop them? Could these traditional practices still work today? Each of these questions touches on misunderstandings that still linger today, and the answers might surprise you. This isn't about just fire, it's about memory, it's about land, it's about the dignity of the voices that knew exactly what they were doing and were silenced anyway. I'll watch along with you and pause here and there to briefly add a few thoughts. Now, if you recognize someone in this video, maybe a grandparent, maybe a great-grandparent, leave a comment below. Let the next generation know their voices still matter. Okay, so let's begin.
Man recognized the importance of fire at a very early date. While we can't presume to know when humans began using fire to selectively create environmental advantages, we do know that for many thousands of years, selective burning was universal. But only now are we beginning to piece together how pervasively and how early he employed fire to change and maintain his natural surroundings. Northern Alberta is bushland, part of the Canadian boreal forest, or taiga, where the fires of spring have been a major environmental factor for controlling the diversity and abundance of plants and animals. Because of its relatively recent isolation, Northern Alberta provides an excellent source of information for traditional Indian knowledge of burning.
And there's 2 lakes. They're not very good. That's where they used to water. It was a good country for buffaloes. They used to burn places where they think it was very useful. Like, for instance, like the places where the horses used to winter in order to have plenty of good feed for them and grass.
Back when my wife was a young girl, there were no automobiles and roads to her reserve, just wagon trails through the bush. So it was very important to maintain healthy horses. So let's continue.
And then where there's lakes, around lakes where there's muskrats, so that they could always have real fresh roads, you know. They live on roads, grass roads mostly, to keep them nice and fresh. If they don't, the roads will spoil and rot, you know, and then they'll die off every so many years. Places where there's moose, and where the moose usually likes to roam around, they burn the brushes there so that they'll have good green leaves and things to live on in summer. And places where the Indians live close to, you know, there'll be brushes like you see round poplars growing in one place, eh? Well, that's where they used to burn it.
Within a few weeks of spring burning, the physical signs of fire are all but obscured. The controlled, light fire initiates an early, more abundant spring growth. It does not destroy it, and it is a type of growth preferred by herbivorous animals, both large and small, which are in turn the prey of carnivores and man.
We used to burn one of these more you got to like open, see, open prairie. But since you quit burn it, it will more grown with everything, bush. Because you don't burn, you just grown.
Let that sink in. These weren't accidental burns, they were deliberate, timed perfectly for when the snow was mostly gone, but the forest was still too damp to catch fire.
Even like here around here, this prairie long ago, it's all open here, all over, like this here. No willows, no pop. Used to make hay right here.
Regions that were once a complex mixture of forest types, muskeg, bush, and large grassland openings, are now dominated by brush and trees. Historical records show that northern Alberta was previously in a more diversified and open environment than is now the case. The record also shows that it was maintained, perhaps even established, by traditional Indian burning.
Since the law was made, you can't burn like you did before. The law started in 1932. After a bad summer forest fire,
That was the turning point. After that, the landscape started to choke on itself and the grasslands turned into dense bush. Wildlife hasn't, wildlife changed. The travel got harder. And the fire risk, it went up, not down. So let's continue.
had burned from Hay River right down to Indian Cabins and Meander River. It burned out by itself. The rangers came and changed the law.
why the bush is so thick, he said, is because since they stopped burning, the Indians stopped burning, the law, and the law passed.
Years ago, it wasn't dangerous to burn prairies.
That 1932 fire, apparently was a very bad one, no question. But the response ignored the real issue. The landscape had already lost its balance because of decreasing burns. Banning fire was like outline medicine after a misdiagnosis.
And meadows, because there was so much less bush and dead trees then. But now, people can't burn so easy because of all that thick bush.
The overall economic aim of spring burning concerned the regional distribution and relative abundance of game and fur-bearing species. The burning techniques employed by Indians of northern Alberta produced a much more open landscape than we now encounter. Names like High Prairie, Rose Prairie, Little Prairie, Hay Lakes, and Wild Hay River are anachronisms now.
That's the part modern policy always seems to miss. These burns weren't just about food. They were about everything: habitat, access, safety, even aesthetics. It was a full environmental management system. They were doing this long before we had words like ecology.
Except, of course, for the squared agricultural fields bordered by an advancing forest. Paradoxically, it was the Indian custom of frequent light burning that had produced and maintained much of the land that white settlers were then able to farm. These open grasslands proved very attractive to the white settler, and he established his homestead on what he assumed was land in its natural state. The technology of spring burning wasn't generally adopted, and in subsequent years, such practices were suppressed by law enforcement agencies, with a result that uncultivated grasslands grew back into bush.
About 5 miles from here, from the river, I guess, up to there you could see straight prairie right to Child's Lake and that timber. That little blue line. Again from there the same thing towards Boyle. Yeah, Rock Lane. You could tell all those prairies. Did you ever see those level prairies? My goodness, I even remember myself. It was really prairie.
I'm old now, but when I was a young man, the Meander River area was like a prairie, but it's all grown up now. Lots of bush and...
Keep in mind, they weren't just burning randomly. This was knowledge passed down over generations. You burn at the wrong time or in the wrong place and you lose more than you gain.
Lots of trees where there used to be grass. The airport is 3 miles from Meander, and from here to there it used to be all open grasslands, but not now. We always burned just before all of the snow melted, before the ducks had started to nest. We didn't burn after the ducks had nested. We knew when to burn and when not to burn. The spring fires made good food for the ducks, and it was good for all kinds of other animals too. In time, many animals go there. Some, like the beaver, about 4 or 5 years after. Especially the bear, because the new bushes of berries growing in the burned places. Bears live not only on leaves and other plants, they also live on berries. They eat all kinds of berries at any season.
For the early practitioners of this fire technology, there was a very precise time for burning. Spring, when the grasses of a meadow were dry and the surrounding forest remained too wet to burn. Only rarely did burning ever take place in the fall, never in the summer.
Now, if people were doing this today, they'd probably be arrested, right? Of course, you have to know what you're doing too, and these men were taught the proper ways by their elders.
At winter's end, new plant growth attracts herbivores. With cleared, blackened surfaces, spring-fired meadows are preheated, and growth occurs several weeks earlier and more lushly than in surrounding areas. In the Canadian boreal forest, where summers are all too short, these areas of induced early growth become important to both animals and man.
They used to start burning when there was still snow here and there.
Know that when I watch this, keep in mind that that's not just memory, that's knowledge. Generational, land-based intelligence. These people weren't guessing. They were paying attention. That's what we need to relearn today. This was environmental science rooted in practice. We have field work now. They lived in the field.
And some of them youngsters even just ride on horses, and they set matches, and that's how they burn. They don't wait until it's really dry, because it's dangerous. And like in trap lines, there'll be just about 2 of them, and yet the fire doesn't. They don't. The fire's not dangerous. They just burn the areas they want.
Spring burning served purposes other than just that of early, more abundant growth. It was used to fireproof settlements, to clear dead and downed trees, the improvement of hunting and trapping areas, ease of travel, the maintenance and improvement of duck and geese habitat, the reduction of mosquitoes and black flies, the improvement of berry patches, the provisioning of ready-dried firewood. Even aesthetic and religious reasons were important. The considerations for burning were as varied as the kinds of resources and types of habitats involved.
When the muskeg burn, what you get wood. I mean, for wood too now, you see if you burn, you get lots of wood. I mean, dry, everything. After you burn, like, now we never burn in some places, you got a hell of a time to get the wood. Now, you have to go long ways to get some wood, you never burn. So long ago you burn when you get wood to any place. Like, even right here now, if you burn all this one in the spring, you get lots of wood, close. If they don't burn, you get nothing.
In the spring, when there is still snow in the bush, that's the only time most people would burn the open places. It is then that people think that it is best to start the burning. There are a lot of places they don't burn. They don't burn all over. To start spring burning again would be good for people because it would help a lot, like it was a long time ago. It would be easier for the people to trap and hunt around the burn, along their trap lines. Sometimes the brush gets so thick that the dogs and sleds can't get through, so they burn it. And then in the fall, it would be good for the animals because they come to the burned area right away.
You know, beavers are an important source of food, pelts, and revenue for First Nations people, and their abundance is achieved partly by preparing the landscape.
Whereas prescribed fires were important for their effects of earlier spring growth and the subsequent abundance of plants during summer and fall, it was actually the distribution and local availability of scarce winter forage that provided the most important adaptive advantage. The selective, carefully considered uses of spring burning throughout hunting and trapping areas added a significant measure of planning and predictability to the otherwise great uncertainties of winter survival. It was, by any definition, a form of resource management, a form of environmental manipulation that enabled northern Indians to maintain and improve the preferred habitats of selected animals.
Sloughs is that's where there's rats, muskrat, that's where they used to burn. And where there's heavy brush, you know, like windfalls and things like that. Or the young trees will grow for to attract the animals, like moose and things. Where there's timber and moss, they don't bother because the fire lasts and lasts, and it's hard to put it out. And furthermore, for fur-bearing animals like martins and things, link, that's where they mostly stay in winter time, so they don't want to destroy that. They must be very wise, eh? Those people, that's right.
I am most impressed by the complexity and interrelations being emphasized by elders in any discussions of the use and effects of fire. The conceptual framework that ecologists use helps us to understand some of the dynamics and complexities of what is both an age-old tradition and a relatively new field of environmental science.
You know, when my wife was a young girl, they still made hay using the equipment shown here. People worked very hard in those days, just incredible.
A few of the meadows, the kinds of areas where woodland bison once grazed and were hunted, are still maintained by spring burning to provide feed for domestic animals, especially horses, which, like hunting and trapping, are important to the image and reality of being Indian. Spring fires expanded the safe area around a settlement when snow and a far higher humidity in the bush made even an accidental outbreak manageable. But spring firing produced more than fire breaks. The meadows were cleared off, forcing an earlier, more productive and more uniform growth. An excellent lure crop for moose, elk, deer, and bear, and the smaller animals, mice by the thousands, which in turn brought in predators such as lynx, coyote, fox, pine marten, even wolves, all valuable to the trapper. In light of this increase in available game, firing was not confined to the settlement areas and nearby meadows. Trappers fired meadows and sloughs along their trap lines every spring to assure next winter's bounty. The existing natural mosaic became more varied, and it continued to grow in complexity and variety. Fire was of particular importance for improving and maintaining the habitats of aspen and willow favored by beaver. In turn, muskrats feed on the rootstocks of cattails. As with many other plants, fire stimulates their growth and ultimately produces a larger population of muskrats. Ducks far prefer nesting on the fresh, more productive growth along the burned section of a lake shore. And spring burns were always set before nesting began. In all, it was a controlled system to initiate what ecologists call early succession, a period of increased growth. All of this was managed by people who had developed a complex technology of fire to assure a continued successful adjustment to the northern boreal forest.
That right there, that's what may be happening on my trap line right now. The overgrowth, the deadwood, the mismanagement. We're reaping the result of banning the very people who knew how to prevent it. It's not just about what we lost, it's about who we silenced in order to lose it.
Much of what was involved in burning came down to considerations about this time of year. The 6 months and more of winter, much of it bitterly cold. The fires of spring helped ensure the relative bounty of summer, fall, and most important, winter. All of it added up to a carefully reasoned plan for coping with and manipulating the northern forest.
It is kind of hard for people to burn nowadays. The way things are now, it would be hard to burn. It would be better to burn again because it would make things different for our people. For a couple of years now, there's hardly any more berries.
But if you burn, well, you coming fast, see? You grow fast. But if you burn right away, well, you grow right away. But if you don't burn, well, you don't grow like right away. Some places where you burn in the spring, and maybe 1 week time it's already, you can see everything grown clean.
Trappers burned when they were on their way home from spring hunting. At that time of year, it was safe, and they burned because it made it better for them in the winter with more animals to hunt and trap for. But that was years ago that they did all that. Nowadays, you can't burn on the trap line because it's against the law, and it's not so good as it was before.
Why they call it buffalo prairies? There used to be a lot of buffalo there long ago. Once in a while they traveled there, when he was still young, and from 11, 12, 13, they used to go down to get groceries and things. They used to see an odd one. There used to be a big prairie there.
All right, as promised, let's wrap up with some of the most common questions people ask. But, when it comes to this video, you think progress is about doing something new all the time. But maybe progress means listening again, going back, learning from what worked. This film is more than just history. It's a roadmap. It's a reminder. And if you appreciated hearing the voices in this film, share this video. And if you recognize someone, say their name in the comments. Let their grandkids and great-grandkids know they mattered. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the Weighted Native Chronicles. We share stories like this where memory and land come together. Okay, let's get to the most common questions. You might be surprised by how much wisdom was packed into these traditions of the First Nations people. Question 1, did Indigenous people really use fire deliberately, or was it just accidental? It was absolutely deliberate. Fire wasn't feared, it was respected. People knew when, where, and how to burn with precision based on weather, moisture, wildlife patterns, and even the behavior of plants. Now, from some of the research I've done on this, early on in anthropology or whatever they do to study history of various peoples, the white man or the Europeans or settlers, whatever you want to call them, when they looked at the First Nations people, they actually looked at these fires that they would start and think that they were just accidental, and that was just very common to those times. The attitudes and understandings of those times. So they wouldn't assume sophistication. Even going back to when Mormonism started. Part of in those days, that was when Europeans were finding all these big structures that were built, and then they're just thinking, well, there must have been Egyptians or somebody came over here to build these very fancy things, because obviously these native peoples, they couldn't have been capable of that. But that's that condescending attitude that, also in the case of these fires, where they would just assume that they didn't know what they were doing. And if you have a fire, of course, just because they're being careless, so they have to come in there and stomp down on these people and tell them, don't do that. We're going to throw you in jail if you keep on doing that. So part of the problem, really. Question number 2, how did they know when and where to burn? If you didn't catch that in the video, it came from generations of close observation. And spring was considered ideal. Dry grass, but wet forest floor. That meant fires stayed low and controllable. They burned meadows, berry patches, lake edges, and travel corridors, all for specific and planned reasons. Question number 3, were these burns safe? Did they ever go out of control? Very rarely is what appears to be the case, because they burned often and they burned in small, manageable patches. There wasn't much fuel buildup. And that's actually very important. Like a lot of the burning that they used to do, they can't really do today, because there's so much fuel in the forests and in the fields that you can't make a small fire. But when they originally did it, they didn't allow that fuel build up in the forest, so fires wouldn't get out of control like as easily as they are today, and we're now suffering the consequences of that. You look across Alberta, just wildfires raging and out of control and very large. So back then it made fires much safer than the massive wildfires we see today. Question number 4, why did the government stop them? Well, I kind of talked about that a little bit already. But after a major wildfire in 1932, government officials banned Indigenous burning. Without understanding the role these practices played in preventing such disasters. Western fire suppression replaced traditional knowledge, often with unintended consequences. Question number 5, could these traditional practices still work today? Yes. And in many places they already are, actually. There's a growing movement to reintroduce Indigenous-led fire stewardship. It's not just practical, It's healing for the land and for the people. So thanks for sticking around. If you've learned something here today, share with someone who still thinks fire is always the enemy. And if you have more questions, leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you. So from the Way to Native Chronicles, wish you God bless, and catch you next time. Did you like this video? If you did, I think you're gonna like this one right over here. So check it out. And I appreciate your subscribing if you haven't done so already. Remember to do that while you're watching this next video. Click like, it all helps us out for this channel. Catch you next time.